All right, you want to get started?
Sure. My name is Rose Viviano, and I'm director of ArtRage Gallery. And together, Kim and I have worked with Karen to welcome this amazing array of women artists. It's been actually a wonderful experience, and this is the first time I'm getting to see all of you, and I'm really enjoying that already. We opened in 2008 as the only, at the time, art gallery that was exclusively committed to showing the work of activist artists. Since that time, we have encountered few, but some galleries that are doing the same thing, that exclusively do this kind of work. And we've found quite an array of artists in all different mediums who are working on really important issues. And I don't want to take up too much time here, but I do want to say that the people who have actually come into the gallery, because of COVID, it's not as many as it used to be, almost all of the people say the same thing. They're looking at your work and they're saying, I find it very disconcerting to find something so horrible, so beautiful. So I think you've all done an amazing job in being able to be true to your art and get the point across to everyone who's able to see it. So I want to thank you for all of that. And that's it for me.
Am I next?
Yes, you are.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Felice. I'm the director of Point of Contact Gallery. It's my pleasure to be here with all of you tonight, as well as have our organization as part of this exhibition. For those of you that may not be familiar with our space, Point of Contact is actually in residence at Syracuse University. We create opportunities for the exploration of diversity and exchange of ideas through verbal and visual arts. We work with Central New York communities as well as statewide and international institutions and individuals. We are a cross-disciplinary, cross-collaborative space where artists, writers, scholars, and students all actively engage in the production of publication, arts exhibitions, and events. Our organization mainly forms or aims to form inspired communities and innovate through artistic concepts that resonate both locally and globally. While we are open by appointment only during the COVID era, you actually do not have to book an appointment to view Deadlocked and Loaded, Disarming America, as the work that we have at Point of Contact is viewable from our front window on West Fayette Street. And I do want to extend a special thank you to my friend and curator, Karen, for connecting us with this extraordinary project. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm hoping that Dr. Jackson from the Community Folk Art Center will be able to join us, but let's just go ahead and jump in. And I think the best way that I'd like to start this one is to an absolutely heartfelt thank you to ArtRage, to Rose and Kim, and to Sarah at Point of Contact, and Dr. Jackson at the Community Folk Art Center. Working with all of you artists and doing this is just been like it's just brings such joy to my life to be able to work with artists such as yourselves on such important subject matters. So what I'm going to do, I think, to best introduce the show is to read the very, short essay of what it's about. So for any viewers out there who haven't read the catalog or had a chance, they'll get a much better feel for what the show's about. So, Deadlocked and Loaded, Disarming America. What does America value? Life or liberty? Deadlocked and Loaded, Disarming America is a locked and loaded conversation through art, showcasing work in all media that address our cultural violence and gun issues in the United States, particularly as it affects women, children, and marginalized peoples. Our gun culture, systemic racism, toxic masculinity, police brutality, and the rise of white supremacy in America are undeniably urgent issues that cannot and should not be avoided or ignored. Polarized political times call for political activist art, and I'm so grateful for this opportunity to showcase you artists. Through my curatorial practice, I promote and support both local, national, and global art activism. I believe the artist's voice can help foster important dialogues and inspire others to add their voice. Given our volatile political climate with the normalization of white nationalism and divisive rhetoric inciting violence, the last 4 years have made it clear that there's a new urgency to address the root causes dividing our country. Our troubling complacency to mass shootings at schools, churches, and public spaces, shootings involving the police, and the stand your ground ideology underscores our collective responsibility to come together for the health and well-being of our country, communities, our families, and ourselves. From a feminist perspective, with the work of 35 self-identified artists with 52 works and a collaborative exhibition that spans 3 galleries here in Syracuse, New York, ArtRage, Community Folk Art Center, and Point of Contact. This exhibit is a visual testimony combining our lived experiences, memory, identity, and beliefs, documenting societal issues related to our cultural violence and systemic racism, crafting narratives that blend art, activism, and a cry for social justice to amplify the voices of those that have been historically silenced. Deadlocked and Loaded, Disarming America reflects this important cultural moment with art that shouts, "Enough is enough," and speaks truth to power. This exhibition is meant to disarm, a double entendre, not only to remove guns from society and those that would seek to harm, but more importantly, to be disarming to the viewer, to engender empathy and compassion to the aftermath and our consequences of said violence. You know, art can be beautiful. It can be ugly and hard to look at. Activist art, however, is not just about depicting beauty, but rather encapsulating and expressing the artist's experience and perspectives into a visual form. It leads not into one conclusion, but rather stimulates our subconscious and emotions, that it may move us to alter our perceptions and viewpoints. And so lastly, this exhibit seeks to engage viewers to listen to each other and collectively seek solutions. Art is a mirror we can hold up to ourselves. When we authentically come together, we are empowered to create community and facilitate positive change. We can alter the social narrative through art. It can influence the way we think and how we act as individuals and as a society. We need the conversations and the actions that follow to build bridges to a more peaceful union that has the foundation for justice for all. And so with that sort of long-winded introduction, I'd love to introduce the artists, and to start with, I'm gonna share a screen to hear from Carol Ann McFarlane, and she is she's going to talk about what inspired her to do her work, which is a very exciting piece that actually involved real bullets. Oh, and here, let me just click down through here. All the artists. Here's a couple install shots at the different galleries. And here is Carol Ann's work, target number 14 and 15. Take it away, Carol Ann. Oh, I think, Carol Ann, you're still on mute. Carol Ann, are you trying to unmute yourself? Kim, can you tell if you can unmute Carol Ann?
She's not on mute. I think there might be a microphone.
Oh, okay. Can you guys hear her? That's the most important thing.
I can't hear her.
Okay, Carolyn, we will come back to you, and let me share the screen, my screen again, and this is the work. So we'll move to, for right now, to Sally Edelstein with Ending Gun Violence. It's about time. Hopes and prayers are not enough. I think we're having some technical difficulties.
I think so, because I'm here, like, but my video isn't. I'm here, like.
Yeah, I think maybe everyone go ahead and just put your video on rather than just the two of us. Okay, now I can see you, Sally.
Okay. And you can hear me too? Like,
yes, yeah, can
so,
hear
right,
you and see you. So break a leg.
So the technical difficulties are now resolved. Like,
yes.
Because, hi. So yes, I'm Sally Edelstein, and my work has always been very informed by history. Like, that's what my collages are about. I'm a collage artist, and in this past year, it had always been my my sensibility that 1968 was the worst year that we ever experienced until 2020 came around. But because 1968 was a year of incredible racial violence and division, and we had two large assassinations of iconic, heroic heroes who offered us hope and change within 2 months of one another. Within 2 months of each other, Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King were killed. And it had only been 3 years that the president had been assassinated. So suddenly someone like myself, who was 13 at the time, was assaulted by all this sort of gun violence that we had never experienced before. So a year later, in 1969, the New York Times ran an ad, which is pretty also remarkable into itself. They ran a full-page ad, and the title of it was, it said, hold on to this page for 1 year and hope and pray that it ends. And what it was a picture of John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King. And the idea of that was like, you know, this can't continue. We have just experienced the absolute worst that could possibly happen. How can we ever move on as a society after this? And of course we're going to change. And then the copy read, the trouble is hoping and praying isn't enough. Violence won't end unless you're willing to start the ending. Now that is something that could have been written this year. That's something that could have been written 5 years ago. So I held on to this page for 51 years. And it came to a point that I knew I had to use that in some form of art. So I went back from 1969 and I started to research all the mass killings that had happened since then. And I was working on a 20 by 20 foot canvas, 20 inch canvas. I could not fit handwriting every single event that happened in that time. I had to edit it. There were hundreds and hundreds, and it was alarming. It was frightening. And so nothing had changed. And you know, we're still using that same phrasing, like, well, let's hope and pray that there will be change. And, you know, and hope and prayer was never enough, and it's still not going to be enough. Like, so, you know, after 50 years, I think I have found a good purpose to use this piece of paper that I saved for so many years to suddenly call to attention, like, let's pay attention now. If not now, when? How much more can we as a society ever experience? So that's basically what this is about. And then along with it, the ad is that I cut out little pieces of paper from old prayer books from that same time period, from the 60s, about all the thoughts and prayers, and juxtapose it against all the different deaths that were happening at the same time. And that's all came together in this one piece as a collage. So That's basically the genesis of it. And it was difficult to do it. It was very sad. It was a very sad thing. The execution of it, no pun intended, but as I would write out the names of these different mass shootings, and I look at this ad and I said, what, is it going to end? And I would write, no, 1979, 1981, 1992, 1995, 6 people here, 13 people here. And it was really sad. So I'm hoping the viewers can have that same impact when they look at that piece.
Here, I'm going to share your image again. And now, let's see, let's go back to Carol Ann. Did we get your technical difficulties sorted out?
I think so.
Oh, yes, I can hear you. That is awesome. And I have to say, when I received this piece in the mail, it's just so incredibly powerful that I don't know if you knew how to shoot a gun before you started this series, but just the fact that these large images are just riddled with the bullet holes was just so incredibly powerful. So now I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you. I made these target images several years ago, about 2006. And after I was showing them for a number of different places, everyone kept coming back to me and saying, you need to shoot them, you need to shoot them. And I didn't know exactly how to get that done at the time. And so thinking about it and, finally decided, okay, this is after I've had a couple experiences with a handgun and going to the range and what the gun culture is like. I've been to gun shows and seen how the interaction and the tone of the language and political perspective. I went out on my own to try to get them shot. First place I went to was this machine gun range down in Wynwood, right there on the edge of all the galleries and all the art fairs that happen during Art Miami Beach. That happens every December. And I went down there and they wouldn't allow me to use my own targets for legal purposes. And they told me to go to another range. I went to another range and they wouldn't allow me to use my own targets. For legal purposes. They didn't really exactly explain, but one can imagine what they meant even after they saw the images. And so I actually had to call an ex and get his input on where to go. And he told me, oh, well, if you go to this one spot, they'll let you shoot whatever you want. And you go down this road, you make a left at the strip club, and then you go behind in this, maze of warehouses, and it's over there. And then you can just go over there and shoot. And I couldn't find it. But, going through the whole process, I am sitting here going through like engaging with these places, as a person who wanted to create work as well as use the facilities, there were still limits to that. And then, having to call on somebody who knew a lot more about the culture and where to go to get it done. And then how he used like, oh, the gun range is in a warehouse behind a strip club. And it's like, okay, well, now we're looking at positioning and bodies and how he described it. And so I had to partner with him to get into the spot because I still couldn't find it, and then actually like shoot him. And then there were people there at the range who asked me like, why was I shooting what I was shooting? Or they were like, where did you get your targets and things like that. So it was that process, and it was also like documenting it as well. So I do have video of me shooting the work. And then as well, I do have photographs of afterwards with the different targets. I think, when I think about it, it's like it's not just about the initial catcalling or the victimization that happens on the street as the targets, as I originally intended the targets to be created as, but like now it's also this other element of like your, possible target in a relationship or in other areas of your life where you can be susceptible to violence as a woman. And that's not just the gun violence, but domestic violence, emotional violence, all of that's there. And what's really important about these pieces is that even though the events are over with, the scars are still there.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, Caroline, we just got a question on where to see your the video. And I know what I'll do tomorrow is I'll put it in my Instagram feed, but also is it in yours or is it easy to find on your website?
Yes, it's on my website and it's also on YouTube.
Okay, great.
Go on my website and go to videos, it's right there.
Okay, and just to let all of our viewers know, like both on ArtRage, their website, my website, you are able to click through to see the entire online catalog, and also links to all of the artists' websites and their Instagram pages are all available. So it's, and of course you can contact me if you know, but anyway, but all that information is there. And then just a quick question, because you were a really good shot. How did that feel handling, you know, the gun? Did it make you feel powerful? Was it scary? Was it a combination?
It doesn't feel powerful really. Like going to the range, there's a lot of rules you have to follow. You know, point the gun down range and keep it down there. You make sure you pick it up by a handle. If you didn't load it, you know, always do a check for it. And a lot of that mechanical stuff, like loading the magazine itself, that can get pretty tough as you know get past maybe 7 bullets, and then like trying to remember like to point it. And one thing like you don't remember is the spark that you see at the end of the nozzle when it goes off. It's like this, like a firework, and then also the recoil, and making sure that the slide, when it comes back and forth on the top of the gun, it can clip your hand. Depending on the model of the gun itself, it can clip your finger or the inside of your hand as it's going back and forth.
Wow.
Some of them are modeled so they have something that protects you, but if it doesn't, then it's there. And it's like, okay. So I was using someone else's handguns, and it was, you know, he chose what he wanted for his hands. And so I had to adapt for that.
Yeah. I think your work is just so powerful on a statement, not only about gun violence, but violence towards women. And I really applaud you and thank you for sharing this with us.
Thank you.
Yeah. And next, let's have Lorraine Bonner, if you want to unmute and put your video on. And I've known Lorraine for many years. She's both an amazing sculptor and beautiful poet. And so with that, take it away.
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. I want to thank you, Karen, for showing my work.
Oh, and here, let me do a screen share really fast. I'm sorry, I forgot to do that.
I have 2 pieces in this show. One is a video called Trust is Your Birthright. And the other is a wall piece, which is a sculpture of a mask called Mending the Futility of Pain. I wanted to talk a little bit about how I started doing art, and then talk a little bit about some larger thoughts I have about gun violence and violence generally. And I'm going to say that I'm putting out a little trigger warning, especially in the beginning. I'm going to be talking a little bit about sexual abuses in childhood. And is the sound coming through okay? Because the little yellow box isn't around my thing.
Yeah, no, you sound great.
Okay, good. So I started out in science and ended up in medicine. I never thought of myself as an artist. I just thought artists were really special people, and I was just kind of regular. But about a half a lifetime ago, I was in a meditation retreat, and I started to recover memories of sexual abuse in my childhood by my father. And over the next few years, those memories really started accelerating and getting more and more extreme, including torture, experiences that felt like death, the recognition that there were more men and more children involved, that some of the things were being filmed. Um, it was very disruptive to my life. And I was trying to do therapy, individual and group, none of that really helped. And it was the 80s and nobody really knew much about trauma in those days. And then there was this big backlash, and people who were recovering these kind of memories were being disbelieved and threatened, and therapists even were being attacked in various ways. So during this time, the therapy wasn't real helpful, but what was really helpful was 12-step meetings. There were 12-step meetings for people who were incest survivors, and particularly for people who had really severe abuse. And in those meetings, the people who had done the terrible things were referred to as perpetrators, and the perpetrator was defined as someone who violated a trust. And I got really deep into the thought about trust. And these meetings were really about the only place where I really felt like these were my peeps, you know. The other thing that was really helpful was that this friend of mine had gone to a ceramics class in a local art center, community art center. And she gave me a bag of clay for my birthday. And I started just kind of playing with it. And these little figures started coming out. And then all of these images started coming out, and things that I couldn't even really say with my mouth, with words, were being illustrated by my hands in this clay. And I was blown away. Nothing like that had ever happened to me before. I'd never done any art before. So I learned some more about clay over time, and I still was continuing to reflect on the whole issue of trust and trustworthiness. And I made one of the pieces that is in the film, which had turned out to be the first of the Perpetrator series. It's a piece called Extracting the Perpetrator, which is a kind of a dark female torso, which the chest is open and there's one hand reaching inside and it's pulling out this white male head. And this is where I think it intersects with the whole issue of gun violence, because, you know, just to talk about gun violence, you know, I looked up some statistics, and there were like over 40,000 people who died from gun violence in 2020 alone. And of course, the country is just totally full of guns, especially those horrible war weapons that have nothing to do with hunting or self-defense. And the easy accessibility of the guns means the things that, you know, people getting mad at each other where they might have just yelled at each other or even pushed each other or hit each other, now they have a gun, they can kill each other. Or if you're feeling really horrible and despondent in the middle of the night, you know, you might have just stayed awake until dawn and felt a little better when the light came up, but now you, in the middle of the night, you can end your life. And that has to do with guns. But when I look at the bigger world, you know, in Rwanda, 800,000 people were murdered with machetes. And the Nazis killed millions of people with gas, and the Stalin starved millions of people in Ukraine. And of course, the European invaders on this continent killed millions and millions of people by just appropriating their lands and driving them off into reservations, not to mention the smallpox blankets. And so I had to think that the problem is deeper than guns. And I'm not trying to get all Charlton Heston on people and saying, yeah, guns don't kill people, people kill. But there's something there about a willingness to kill people, to hurt people with guns. And so this goes back to the whole question of trustworthiness and trust to me. And the fact that my father was willing to do that, and the other men were willing to do the things that they did to me and to the other children and even other adults, felt like such a disruption of a trust and trustworthiness that's supposed to exist, not just between parents and children, but between human beings generally. And that expectation of trust is something that has evolved in us as a social species over millions of years of evolution. It's built into our brain cells. So what has happened is somewhere along the line, and I think it probably has something to do with agriculture, but you know, there's a lot of theories about this. These structures of hierarchy and supremacism, and I'm better than you, and therefore I have the right to harm you, the socially conditioned supremacist ideas took over, got into our mental structures. And so when I made the piece Extracting the Perpetrator, I saw it as taking the socially conditioned supremacist structures of white over black, male over female, mind over body. There's a lot of it, there's a lot of it,
Yeah, there really is.
Adult over child. And just taking those out of my mind. It's the stuff that Isabel Wilkerson is writing about in her book Caste. And just leaving space to imagine a different, more humane way of interacting. And it comes to those, like a lot of us think now about intersectionality, and it's all about intersectionality of the oppressions, because there's no such thing as a Black person who doesn't also have gender, who isn't able-bodied or disabled, sexuality, or an age, or religious beliefs. I mean, we're bundles of all of that stuff. And the only reason that those differences even matter or get teased out is because the people who are supremacist want to use those characteristics as a difference, as a way of separating people, so that there can be a higher and a lower, and some people get more food, and some people get to live in mansions, and other people get to live in tents on the sidewalk.
Yeah. Well, Lorraine, can you give us one parting thought, perhaps ever, whether it's in the book Caste or your work in general?
I'm sorry, too long?
Yes, we need to. Yeah.
Okay. So
I wish we had more time.
Yeah, I know. I wish the second piece that I have is the piece called Mending the Futility of Hate. And what I see is we're really pretty broken as a people, and we have to mend ourselves. I'd like to think about healing, but I think an early stage of healing is mending. And in these pieces, I take a piece, like in this case, it's a mask, and break it, and then repair it with gold, so that the broken places become even more beautiful. And that's my hope for where we can be.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
I'm sorry to go on too long.
No. Are you kidding? I mean, the story and everything you're saying is so powerful and meaningful.
Yeah, usually
and
beforehand, but I have to leave early also. I just want to
Yeah. No, I realize you do. And one really good thing about the online catalog is we have everyone's statements. So it's like, I really encourage our viewers to, to take a look at it, and you can dive deeper into all the artists' work. And next we have is Nettie available?
Right here.
All right, let's get your video turned on. And I'm going to do a quick screen share so we can see your work.
Okay.
It's such a it's a very
No
large,
video.
powerful drawing. Okay. Hi, welcome.
Oh, hello, glad to be here.
Yeah, so you and I have been, gosh, it goes back at least 6 or 7 years when I think, or maybe even 10 years, that you had some work in a show that I did. So I was so happy that you had work for this one.
Oh, I'm so happy to be in this one. It's such a great topic and so timely, And my concern, as you see, were the women. And I had been doing a lot of women encased in lace. And in this one, the lace becomes a chain link fence, because as I said in my statement, women have always been in the forefront, but they haven't always been heard. So that's why I call that speaking out, breaking out, to get out of the confines of society, I would say limitations, to speak out, be heard, and by joining together, be a strong force. And especially when it comes to protecting children. And the rage is because of the horrible episodes involving children and guns. So that was the reason behind that piece.
Yeah, no, that was great. And hey, I want to ask a question to the audience. This is more a technical thing. When I share the screen, are you still able to see, like say Nettie and the work? What are we seeing there?
Well, I only see the work.
Okay, so and maybe if someone would just put it in the comments, because I just had someone asked if I would leave the artwork up longer, which
Oh, okay.
I would love to do during the whole time, like while you're speaking. And so, so I'll try that for next time. We'll see what someone says. Oh, it says only the artist know. Okay. So yeah, do you have any other thoughts? Can you share with us, Nettie, about your work and your process?
Well, the process really is graphite drawing, and it's done on vellum, which is semi-transparent. And after I do the drawing, I place a piece of acetate over it. And that's when I use the etching needles to scratch in the lace. And then it's all, one is superimposed over the other. And I think the one that is in the exhibit is actually the print made after the acetate is placed over the drawing. So it's seen as one piece. And that's the process.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. It's such a great piece. Well, thank you. And next up is Christine Oleski. And let me pull her work up. And I think I'm just going to leave her work up the work up the whole time. Mm-hmm. And Christine, are you ready?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Hi. So my work is a little different than all of you ladies. I really admire all of your individual work. I'm grateful to be, there are many that have contributed to my project. It's my baby, and and I began it, I'm the founder of it, but today it continues because of many artists nationally. So I started Faces Not Forgotten about 11 years ago. It began, my own work always had involved working with feminine domestic fibers, like you'll see on the quilts there. The portraits are all superimposed over handkerchiefs, because even today, I still have a real fascination with just the human imprint we leave on items, and what women working with fibers have down through how we hand down quilts, we hand down handmade things that stay in families, and it holds that imprint of the women that created it. So that's what's behind the handkerchief, part of what's behind the handkerchief imprint. But the project began as I was actually working through my own grief and my own loss. So I'm a gun violence survivor, which is something I weirdly was about 5 years into the project before I recognized myself as that. My father killed himself when I was about 20. And suicide is, not something still talked about much. I didn't even know that he owned a gun other than a hunting gun. So I didn't really grow up around guns. And then about 11 years ago, I had a family friend who was a social justice activist. He was an oblate priest, which is a order that devotes themselves to poverty and activism. And he'd been in Selma, he'd been involved with civil rights, he'd been involved in South America. And then he was just pretty randomly gunned down in Guatemala. And he'd been speaking out to protect children. And I'd had long conversations with him about all of his activism, like, how do you know what activism you want to do? How do you know what you're driven to speak out about? And I was an artist painting things that meant something to me, but he just kept saying, you'll know. And I guess today I would say, I know. I mean, this is something that I'll always do. I would love to think it would end, but at the rate of 8 children dying every day, these are all children aged 20 and under who have died from gun violence, portraits of them. And, we are primarily doing portraits of children of color, because children of color are 8 times more likely to die of gun violence just as a result of our culture and, the systemic racism that we are living with and the circumstances that they live in, where, a little girl named Heaven having a lemonade stand on her sidewalk can become, a victim and die. So all of these beautiful faces are all these children, and so many of them, maybe you don't even hear about them in the news. When I started Googling children and gun violence when Father Larry died, and I was really very naive to the numbers and the situation. I live outside of St. Louis, but I was real naive, and I couldn't get over numbers, and I just kept seeing numbers, and I'm not a number person. I couldn't fathom a number for a life. And so one child, his father had made a website about him, William, and I got a hold of his dad and said, Bill, would it give you comfort if I did a portrait of William for you? And so he liked the idea, and he sent me a photo, and I did William's portrait. And that was the first portrait that I did about 11 years ago. And I think there's something to a hand-drawn, a hand-painted portrait. We reserve something like that for dignitaries, and kings and queens have their, portraits in castles, and we might have a selfie or a school photo, but so many of these families, that's maybe all they have. So to spend time with the child and think about the portrait and artists, this is, for me, it's hard. It's good, but it's hard because you get involved with the soul of the child. And I always tell artists, focus on their eyes, just see if you can't, bring out their soul. So that comes across, I think, in the portraits. And the families, again and again, usually we have a conversation about, when you lose a child, which I can't fathom, losing a parent, I've lost loved ones, but to lose a child and to know you're outliving your child, they say over and over to me, they don't want that child to be forgotten. So that's our mission, and our goal is that these children are not forgotten, and that the families are given some small comfort with the original portrait. And then I translate a copy of the portrait into the quilt panels, which become the Faces Not Forgotten quilts that are on exhibit in the Point of Contact gallery today. So there are about 30 quilts nationally now. I think a lot about the AIDS quilts. I think a lot about art and the power to embed in our social consciousness images that after, things that get embedded in our consciousness with enough repetition, with enough time, it elevates us. It gives us a new perspective. So something like Black Lives Matter, we know what that means. We've heard that now, seen that image, it's embedded, it's taking place. And I would, hope that Faces Not Forgotten might bring about that kind of recognition someday, that we cannot accept 8 children dying every day from gun violence.
Yeah, no, it's such just incredible project that you've taken on. And I can't imagine just like while you're creating these beautiful, beautiful portraits, to know that these are all poor children that have been killed. So I just so applaud you, not only for your beautiful work, but what you're doing for the families and to raise awareness. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks for having me as part of it. I really admire all the art here and all the artists. It's quite a strong exhibit. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I've been wanting to show your work for years, but we just never had enough space. So now finally being able to put just 6 panels in was really, I just loved being able to do that.
Thank you.
All right. And next we have Rosemary Meza-Desplas, and let me show you her work, and so what you may not be able to see, you know, from just like this digital image, but where you can see what looks like little hairs coming off actually are hairs. So Rosemary works with embroidering hair. And so from here, I will let her take over.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Cry Die or Just Make Pies is part of a series from 2012 to 2013. And it was inspired by Hannah Wilkes' photographic series titled So Help Me Hannah, Snatch Shots with Ray Guns. And the women in my series are nude and they're carrying guns. The poses are suggestive of thriller films or suspenseful narratives. And like Karen just said, this is a fiber work and it's made with hand-sewn human hair. The material emphasizes the feminine. This series of artworks was created in tandem with writing an academic paper. It was titled Chicks with Guns, the link between violence, sexuality, and femininity in images. Charlie's Angels, Columbiana, Sucker Punch. In film and television, there is an aggregation of images set forth showing women engaged in violence while wearing skimpy clothing. French New Wave filmmaker Jean-Luc Godard once posited all he needed to make a movie was a girl and a gun. Commercial potential is maximized by the trifecta, a phallic weapon, a sexy woman, and the promise of gratuitous violence. However, there's a discrepancy between the sexualized female action hero and society's multifaceted reality. The visual perception of female empowerment in the 21st century has been packaged for public consumption with an eye for seductive clothes and cold, hard steel. Images in film can construct transformative perspectives about women being liberated, extremely strong, and masterfully savage. However, the question remains is where do these women exist in our global society? In reality, women are disproportionately impacted by gun violence. As a survivor of domestic violence, I'm familiar with living in fear of a gun. Firearms are used to control, to terrorize, and intimidate. Firearms are the weapon of choice in domestic violence homicides. From the U.S. State's Department of Justice website on domestic violence related firearm cases in 2020, nearly half of female homicide victims in the United States are killed by current or former male intimate partner. It is believed that domestic violence homicides increased in 2020. I view social political issues such as gun violence through a lens of feminist ideology. The body of my artwork focuses on socio-political issues through a broader perspective, yet underpinning the artwork is my personal experiences as a Latina in these United States. And Karen, thank you for including me in the show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I am so happy to have you in the show, and we've worked together in so many, and your work is always, it's just stunningly beautiful and so strongly feminist and with just so much thought, intellectual thought behind it. So it's like you couple all those things together. And so, yeah, thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Thank you.
Yeah. So next, Amy Pleasant. And this, I just love this work. I mean, I love it's trying to like pick your favorite child, which is absolutely impossible to do, but all the works in the show. But, and I know Amy will probably, you know, she'll address this, but that she is, you know, was a teacher and has been involved in a couple, you know, active shootings where, and so it's just mind boggling. But anyway, I will let Amy take it away.
Thank you. Well, I was going to say that I've spent many years in the classroom, and I took a long break and then returned to the classroom last year. I did a one-year position, and in the meantime, I went back to art school and working as a full-time artist. But I noticed something. When I was teaching before, we did lockdowns every year. And it was kind of like for the students having a fire drill. It's like, it's just something you do, you're used to doing it. You really don't think it's ever going to happen. And it just becomes a part of something you normally do. Over time, what I notice is that attitude among the students really did change. And one, the lockdowns themselves are anxiety provoking. And two, students are very much aware now of the statistics, and that it's not just a drill, but that it is a real possibility that this all becomes real. And I watch my students, we know the drill is coming, and you watch the level of anxiety raise. And we, of course, have discussions, and I reached out to parents and to try to support students. At least my students, they're problem solvers, and we would have a discussion, and it would always come up. They'd have ideas. Well, we need to have backpacks that are bulletproof and that we can put in front of ourselves. We need to have flak jackets at school that we can put on. And invariably, someone says, we can make them pretty colors. So that's where this piece actually came from. And seeing how much anxiety there is just from the drill itself, even if students hadn't been involved in an active shooting. And I know it is just so commonplace that one thing I found, it was just heartbreaking to watch students. And the first time with this group of students that we had our drill, we had kind of a practice. And I said, okay, because I wanted to see how they were trained from previous classes. So they all got in a line by the closets and sat down. And just, you know, there had been more publicity. That's the wrong thing to do, because the shooter can just basically shoot everyone at once. So I knew that in my head, but one of the students raised her hand and she brought that point up. And so I said, well, I want you to try to find the place where you feel safe. And they kind of scattered throughout the room, but there was a cluster that kind of just stood in the middle and waited for me to stop doing what I was doing. And then they joined me, like, you know, little chicks to the mother hen. And I think this past year was the first year I just felt so strongly that surely we can do better than this as a society. It's such a complex issue, but there are solutions if there is a will. And the phrase that I had on the piece, I really do believe that that's how society should be judged, is how do they treat their children? And we have some things to answer for. And that's kind of why so this has nothing to do with gun violence, but excited about the stimulus today and how much of an impact it will have on child poverty. It's like it's a step in the right direction. And it's this issue of guns, it is so incredibly important to deal with for children. And then the other piece of this, which isn't reflected in the artwork so much, but when I used to teach in East LA, and it was a wonderful neighborhood, and the neighborhood and the community was just wonderful, but there was a lot of gang activity. And one of my students was having trouble with someone on the playground. It was a second grader. And one of the kids kind of said, "You need to look in their desk." So I went over, the kids went out to recess, and I went over, I lifted up his desk, and it was a loaded handgun in the desk.
Oh my goodness.
And I had never touched a gun. So I went and got another teacher, the teacher next door, and he helped me take care of it. But what I realize is, along with this issue, is children's access to guns.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you have taught at all in the last 5 years, you know that suicide rates among children are rising exponentially. I think between 2018 and 2020, they've risen by 250%. And that is an important issue, that these children do not have access to guns at home. So again,
no, that's so true. And unfortunately, we're because I can't believe it's 8 o'clock already, and we still have a good number to go through. But one thing we could do too is people, if you artists and our panelists, if you'd like to put some more thoughts in the chat so everyone can read it as we're listening along. But that, I can't believe that the children brought a loaded gun to school. But I mean, that's to be expected. If they're at home, they're gonna might bring it for show and tell.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you.
Really appreciate
Sorry I
it.
took so long.
Oh, no, that's okay. Yeah, so since it is already 8 o'clock, I'm going to ask the artists that are coming up, let's be succinct just so we can get through everyone and have time for questions and answers at the end. So next we have Patricia Turner, and with her installation that's at ArtRage, that Assault in Orlando. And so Patricia, take it away.
Karen, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
And it says that it can't start my video without you starting it, the host.
Oh, okay. We'll have Kim will be able to do that. Perfect. All right.
Okay, but I'll go ahead and go on because I just introduced myself. First of all, thank you to everybody that came, and thank you, Karen. My name is Patricia Turner. I'm a mixed media and textile artist. One common thread, so to speak, through all my work is stitchery. And I want to talk just a little tiny bit about how I first envisioned this installation and how it came out. And then I want to talk very briefly about the response I got from people from Orlando, because of course this is about the massacre in Orlando in 2016, when Omar Mateen massacred 49 victims at the Pulse nightclub. So I first envisioned this installation very differently. I had the flag on the wall with an acrylic rod that hung above the flag, displaying the names of all the victims, and that I would be free motion stitching with my sewing machine. And but I have health issues with my back, and at that time I was unable to sit for many weeks, so the sewing machine was not an option. I became interested in origami because I could stand at my work table and my ironing board. I wanted to find a pattern for butterflies that was adaptable to silk, my hand-dyed silk, and then put the victims' photos hovering above the multicolored wings. But the best I could actually do with finding a pattern I could work with was flying cranes. So I rethought the exhibit to envision them hung from the ceiling. I dyed the silk organza in my little mini pool where I could easily reach the deck for painting. And then I made 50 cranes or flying creatures or birds. The first one took an entire day and a half. By crane number 50, it took about a half an hour. But they did not hang from a height without drooping. So I had to insert small coils of wire into the body, back, and to both of the wings. Again, this was a very time-consuming process. So I want to just say a shout out to my friend Shilana Massey, who may be here, and thank her again because I finished the installation in time for the show in Sarasota. Now the important part. I have been active on Facebook long enough to be in over 50 Facebook groups, and consequently, I can post one photo quickly to many, many thousands of people through group posts. But the response to the photo of this installation took me quite by surprise. In one group alone, Pantsuit Nation, I received over 3,200 reactions and too many comments to count. The post ended up circulating in the Orlando area, and the visceral but positive comments made by the Orlando residents were priceless. Two of the respondents, both women, were actually present at the nightclub that horrible night. One was injured in the melee, but thank God she was not shot. But what is forever now imprinted on my psyche is the reaction of the other woman who was also at the nightclub. She saw Karen, your short video of the fans causing the cranes to move. And then she wrote to me that my installation will now forever remind her that the victims are still dancing, but just like they always did so very joyfully at the Pulse nightclub. And that alone was worth making the piece. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. It's such an amazing, beautiful piece. And oh, and this is something I want to announce is I'm starting tomorrow, I'm going to be doing a thing called 2 at 2. So at 2 p.m. Eastern, every day I'm going to be talking with the individual artists, where each person will talk for like maybe, anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes. So I encourage everyone, follow me on Instagram, and then look for Instagram Live at 2 p.m. every day. 2 p.m. Eastern time on Instagram. And next here we have is Alice Beasley. I first saw her work at the Museum of Quilts and Textiles in San Jose, and just fell in love with it. And this is she has one of her works, Unidentified Black Male, and then also Whose Second Amendment. And I know, Alice, you said you have a rant, so take it, go with it.
I'm not going to do the rant, but I will tell you, you're limiting me to 3 minutes, and a rant takes longer than that. So, at any rate, I work really exclusively in fabric, creating pictures out of fabric alone without drawing or painting on them. And my interest in this subject matter really began probably with Newtown. Like most people, the image of little babies being slaughtered by assault weapons, I think we all said, well, at last, finally, somebody's going to do something about the easy access to such weapons. But they didn't. And so I made art, and the shootings kept happening, and I kept making art. I think I've made about 5 or 6 pieces on this subject now. And I would say that most of the pieces focus on the different way that society treats guns if you're a white person and if you're a black person. So I didn't grow up in a gun culture. I was a child in the 50s and a teenager and young adult in the 60s. And it would be unthinkable at that time for people to have, rooms full of guns and things like that. It began because the Black Panthers were tired of police visiting violence upon them, so they adopted the stance that they had a Second Amendment right to carry weapons. And the furor that arose because of the Black Panthers carrying of weapons, white people said, we can't have that. And they immediately adopted gun control. And Ronald Reagan was the governor of California. They adopted a gun control measure, and said there is no constitutional right to carry guns. So that was black men carrying guns. They adopted, that provision. But as we can see now, the Proud Boys and others can walk along the street, walk into Walmart, walk anywhere place that they want to, carrying guns of every type of description and be completely unmolested by police. While Philando Castile is murdered by police in his car while telling them he had a legally registered gun. He had no Second Amendment right that was required by them to be recognized. So I did these pieces. The first one, I was so struck by what Christine was saying because my piece, Unidentified Black Male, could be a bookend to exactly what she was talking about. Although we focus attention on, the mass murder of children in school, we forget about the fact that 8 times as many black children are being murdered by guns all the time. And but they are basically unidentified, not thought about. The press is not concerned with them as individuals. And that's why she has to make portraits of them so that they won't be forgotten. So I did that piece, and then I did the other one that you showed, Whose Second Amendment, because as I said, a white man can, be completely unmolested by police if he's walking along the streets, particularly in some locations, with assault weapon over his shoulder. But a black man, there's a video actually, you should Google it sometime on YouTube, a black man who's trying to make a point, and there was first a white guy who was walking along the street with a gun, in his back, and a policeman comes up to him and says, some people have been saying that, they're uncomfortable seeing you with this gun. One policeman. And he says, I have a Second Amendment right to carry a gun and blah, blah, blah. And he said, well, give me your name. He said, I am not required to tell you my name and so forth. And they said, well, but, I understand your position, but geez, these people are uncomfortable. And, so nobody did anything to him. Meanwhile, a black man at a different time is walking along the street with an assault weapon on his back. His wife is filming it at the time. And so he's just walking along the street. A police car pulls up. The cop doesn't approach him, but immediately draws his gun on him. Down on the ground, get down on the ground, put your hands down, blah, blah, blah. And he says, I'm just, I have a license, I have a right to carry a gun. Down on the ground, down on the ground. And then another slew of police cars show up. Down on the ground, down on the ground. They came over and they had their guns trained on him. The wife is screaming, and she was pregnant. They made her get on the ground too. I'm just saying, it's just a completely different society. Proud Boys can storm the U.S. Capitol and go home. Just imagine black men storming a federal building and just being allowed to go home. Anyway, that's what most of these pieces are about. And the one about, I did one about Trayvon Martin, which I just can't imagine if positions were reversed between George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin, that Trayvon Martin wouldn't have been convicted for killing him if he had stalked him and then killed him. So anyway, that's one rant. It's not my only rant.
Yeah. Thank you, Alice. It's like those facts. It's atrocious. And next up, we have Justine Fisher, who actually has 4 works in the exhibition. And right here, I just have 2. And one I'd like to point out is when you walk by this piece, this work, Our Sons, when you walk by, it sets off a trigger that actually the police lights go off, which is just so amazing. Of course, I can't show it in a still shot, but I've worked with Justine, a good friend, for years, and she does very beautiful, very powerful, large works. And so, Justine, take it away.
Thank you so much, Karen. I'm glad to be here tonight. I wanted to talk about the reason I started this series of work, which was in 2014. At the time, I was doing work that was about personal struggle, and I got to a breaking point where I knew I wanted to do work outside of myself that wasn't about me personally, but that was still very meaningful to me. And it started in 2014 after Michael Dunn was acquitted for shooting Jordan Davis, almost exactly a year after George Zimmerman was acquitted for shooting Trayvon Martin, both in the same state of Florida, within, you know, miles of each other. And that really sat with me, and I knew that I had to do a piece about it. So that's when I did the piece, The Sunshine State, emphasizing the stand your ground law and showing both of them being lynched. And all of you know, and it's already been stated, that there are a different set of rules for Black men and Black women in this country. There just is. It's a reality that we as Black people have known forever. And now the rest of society knows it thanks to social media and to smartphones. So Black icons, the piece in the cross format, I decided to do that because historically I print on voile, which is translucent. And I try to make a very impactful image on a fabric that is translucent to capture that memory of the loss. So many people, when I first started making these pieces, had no idea what they were about. They were like, oh, that's beautiful. What is this? Oh, this is really cool. And I tell them the story and they're like, that happened? And I'm like, well, yeah. Do you not watch the news or look at, and I was really shocked in 2014 how many people just did not know about Trayvon Martin. They didn't know about Jordan Davis. They didn't know about any of it. So they were happy to learn about it, but then they were kind of sad that, well, why do you want to focus on this? And I'm like, because it's really important to me and people need to know these stories. So it was really about using the medium of printmaking to capture a moment and to memorialize the human being. So with that said, Our Sons is actually part of a triptych called Systematic, but that piece can also be viewed by itself. In my work, I'm really just trying to give the victim a voice, but also to honor their memory and to inform people about what's really going on and what has been going on for years that is now, thankfully, more known due to smartphones. That's all
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say thank you so much for the work that you do and sharing these stories to memorialize these people. And I do, I mean, this is the reason I curate these sorts of shows, is because I really do believe in the power that art can change, you know, can change lives and change people and create positive change for the future. So thank you, Justine.
Thank you.
And next we have Kate Kretz, who has a couple of works in the show. This first is actually an LED screen and I'll let her explain it more fully, and that you see when you first walk into ArtRage. And then her others, these two works are from a series called the Gun Lickers. And they're just absolutely gorgeous, harsh subject matter, but absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous paintings. And so thank you for being with us, Kate, and take it away.
And thank you. Well, I was trained as a painter, but I also do a lot of fiber work. And this first piece is, as so many people have already mentioned, this idea that, you know, thoughts and prayers are supposed to help us. And it is a scrolling LED light that takes actual headlines and then the actual responses of the politicians. So it will say, you know, schoolyard murders, and then it will say, you know, our thoughts are with the victims. And so the other pieces are part of the Gun Licker series, which now has 4 pieces. I have an idea for a 5th one that I may add someday. And I was inspired by gun fetishists, people who have an abnormal attachment to their guns. And I would remark that there are lots of people who own guns but are not offended by these works because they know that they don't, you know, collect and fetishize guns in this way. And they're deliberately shown with guns that are not used to fend off intruders or hunt for their dinner, but machines specifically designed for military use to kill as many people as possible in the shortest period of time. And I really think that right now, these are used as tools of intimidation. All of this open carry, especially in protests. And I myself get a lot of people trying to friend me on like Facebook or Instagram, and they always show themselves with their guns, whether it's, you know, a whole bunch of them behind them or, you know, and so they're being used as a way of intimidating people. And I really think we need to start thinking about people who are open carrying these semi-automatic weapons should be prosecuted for stalking or threatening violence. So I'm really, I think we need to work against the normalization of open carry. And, you know, Karen asked me about making these pieces, and I have to say that as serious as I am about this subject matter, when I was making them, I was trying to make them as juicy and lascivious as I possibly could. And so there was this kind of, you know, aspect to making them that focused on that.
Yeah, what I love about these is not only you know, talking about the fetishization of guns, which I think is so prevalent, you know, in our culture, but also on the toxic masculinity, which is that's a whole nother subject that, you know, we could get into. But anyway, thank you so much for sharing those with us. And next we have Priscilla Otani, who actually created this work specifically for this exhibition. I've worked with Priscilla for years and years when she was president of the Women's Caucus for Art, and we've collaborated on more projects than I could possibly name. But Priscilla, if you're here, take it away. And I have to say, I have to step away for like 10 seconds to grab my my power cord so my computer doesn't die on us. So Priscilla, if you'd like to start.
Karen, thanks for curating all of these amazing works for the show.
Thank you.
When she first approached me about this subject, I was at a loss. I grew up in Japan, and my initial thought was, well, they don't really have gun violence in Japan. But at the same time, having given it some thought, I realized, well, actually, that's not true. It's not like guns don't exist in Japan. All the police carry them. My father has had a collection of guns for hunting purposes most of my childhood. And I was certainly given toy guns to play with as a child. And so I sort of went back to my childhood first, which involved a life surrounded actually by guns in Japan. First of all, the toy guns, I also was given an outfit, a cowgirl outfit, which was unusual, of course, in Japan. My father had gotten it through the Montgomery Ward catalog, and I loved wearing it. But I was not that fond of the little pistols because I cut my finger pretty badly on the trigger. And after that, I was terrified of using that toy. But I thought about how prevalent guns are as toys and games children play about shooting and killing, which seems to be, you know, something that children go through as a rite of passage, it seems, even today. And that gave me some thoughts about how I wanted to approach this art piece. I'm a mixed media artist. I'm not a quilter. However, because of COVID, I couldn't really work in my studio. And so I had to use whatever I had at hand in my home studio, which is primarily a sewing machine. And I decided at first to create a tumbling blocks quilt because that seemed like a very childlike theme. But I realized I'm not a quilter, so I don't know how to put those blocks together perfectly. So then I realized, oh, well, why don't I get some rag dolls? And I ordered some rag dolls from Etsy. And what was also interesting was I was also looking for gun paraphernalia, badges and little toy things. And I was amazed at how much was available. I mean, even actual sheriff's patches were available at a very low cost. And so I started to purchase a selection of them to add to my quilt. And at the end, I embroidered the names of children killed in various school shootings. And instead of using the actual rag dolls in the quilt, I took photos of them without their clothes on to show their fragility. They're all used dolls. Many of them have torn bits on their bodies. And I decided to photograph them and then print them out on fabric so that it was also incorporated in the quilt. And yeah, it somewhat represents my childhood in terms of the games I used to play. I used to also undress my dolls with my friends. That seemed like the fun thing to do. But it also represents being, raised by a parent who liked to shoot. And my mother and I had to deal with the carcasses of birds once they were brought home. I mean, we butchered godzillion wild ducks in our backyard. And, I helped my mom when I was like 5 or 6 to pull their heads off and stick my hands in their bodies and pull out the guts, and the bodies were still warm. And I didn't think anything about it. My father moved to the States later in life. He and his wife got handguns right away to protect themselves. They lived in Vegas. But in the end, all of his guns were taken away from him because he got Alzheimer's and he started to get violent. And there was a great deal of fear that he would use the gun on his wife. So,
Wow, so that's amazing. Did your father, who took the guns from him? Family or like a police or doctors?
Yeah,
or?
my stepmother had her son remove all the guns by my father. My father was not altogether there, although he was quite violent in the end, I might add. But yeah, so really, I had to sort of go back to my childhood experience and to recollect that actually I lived among guns most of my life.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And that brings up like a whole nother subject of thinking, when someone is not of sound mind, when can we take their guns away? And I think that's a much bigger conversation of whether it's someone who's been convicted of domestic violence, or they have a mental illness, or an illness, such as Alzheimer's. But Priscilla, thank you so much. I really appreciate you creating this work for us. And next we have Ann Lewis, and this is a beautiful, heartbreaking installation that is at ArtRage, that when you walk in the door, you see these 28 pairs of shoes. And I'll let Ann go from here to explain what that means.
Sure. So again, thank you, Karen, and everyone for being here tonight. It's wonderful to connect with everyone as much as possible during these crazy moments of COVID. I wish we could do it in person, but this piece is, This Is Who We Are, number 2. It is a reflection of, as many folks have said today, 8 children are killed by guns in the United States every single day. And so this is a representation, I think, of 1 week. So there's 56 pairs. Each of them is shattered by hand. So these porcelain shoes are very reminiscent of, like the preciousness of children and sort of their first early years. I know in my family, we had like these little footprints, like plaster things, but these shoes also seem to be somehow representative of children, babies even. And so this piece, so This Is Who We Are, number 1, was originally done while I was in residency at Santa Fe Art Institute in New Mexico. And while I was driving there from Detroit, the Parkland shooting happened. And so you drive across the country by yourself and all you're hearing is this horrid story of all of these kids being shot. And that, really implanted in my brain. And what ended up happening is the installation that I did there was slightly different. It was in an interactive piece, which placed a gun lockbox in the middle of a room that was surrounded. the box was encircled by these shoes, and they were all intact. And every day at a certain time, I would unlock the box, and inside were a pair of scissors. And I encouraged participants and viewers to use the scissors however they wanted, in reflection of sort of this statistic. And what was fascinating is, you know, so many people like walked in and cut the ribbons and the shoes shattered, to sort of represent this death and this passing and this destruction. But, you know, there was this, this space where folks were, you know, crying. I feel bad. My cohort was entirely emotional because of the piece. But what ended up happening is the last day, there were several pieces, several pairs of shoes that were still hanging. And one of the women in my cohort gently held the shoes, cut the ribbon, and placed them on the floor. And so this piece was really about like inspiring people to consider how we're all complacent in the violence that is perpetrated upon children in this nation, and sort of our culture as a whole. You know, we can't just blame politicians, and we can't just blame people with guns. We are all participating in this, you know, republic. I won't call it a democracy, but we're all participating, and we really have an opportunity to use our voices, you know, as so many of us in this room right now are, with our creative practices, but we really have a responsibility to consider what our place is in that conversation. And so that's really what that project was about, was really giving people the opportunity. There was no instructions. I never said like cut the ribbons. I just opened the box with a pair of scissors in it and allowed people to sort of participate how they felt they maybe represented themselves within the larger context. So.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing this story. And Anne has another work that is in the catalog, and that I would have loved to have had in the gallery. Oh gosh, now the title is escaping me, but it's how many toe tags of people that have been killed by gun violence. So it's an amazing, similar, you know, installation of. What is the title of that, so we can have people look it up? And I apologize for forgetting.
Sorry, it's called Anne County.
Great. Oh yes, of course. Yes. And that's such an amazingly powerful work too. So thank you, Anne, so much. And now we just have 2 artists left. Next is Mona Cliff. And with this work by Mona, it's at the Community Folk Arts Center, and it's so powerful. It's large. It's like 60 inches long. And I have to say, it's like, unfortunately, when I was installing it, we had, it was very triggering for, you know, a young student that was helping me install, because he had been involved in some active shooting at his school where he went to high school. And so it's such a powerful work. And so Mona, take it away.
Well, thank you, Karen, for you know, putting this all together too. When you told me that, I really, my heart went out to him for having that reaction. I had this idea in my head for quite a long time in response to the Dylan Roof shooting in Charlottesville, I believe. Like, there was so many since then. And my feelings of helplessness, every time, you know, I would see the news and they'd be dragging the shooter out, of course, you know, like alive, and taking him to jail peacefully. And the eyes always stood out to me, because there's like this slackness in their eyes. There's like this inhumaneness in the eyes of those shooters. Like, and my frustration, and I was scared to make this, if that makes any sense. It was in my mind, and I was scared to make it because I was afraid to have to do it and face that. And so it was very you know, in my mind, when I had initially thought of the idea, it was full faces. And then as I was going through the collages, I kind of fell back on my older works, types of working is collage from a long time ago. And this doesn't really usually fit within my normal, what I've been doing now in my practice, which is usually celebrating Indigenousness and, you know, our culture. And so I couldn't get it out of my head. And so eventually I did have to make it. And at that point, as I was creating it and using those, you know, photographs of these shooters, I felt like they didn't deserve to have their entire face shown. So that's where it came to the eyes, because also the eyes are always what had been piercing, and what you can see that like level of mental illness in their eyes. So that's why I kind of started directing it right there. So yeah, it's just, you know, I was afraid to make it. That sounds really weird, but I mean, that's just kind of where I went with that. I was, you know, I didn't want to show it. I didn't show it. I made it and I actually let it sit in the corner of my house for, you know, like a year before I felt confident enough to share it with, you know, on social media, which is usually the first, you know, thing. So yeah.
Yeah, well, no, I think it's just so incredibly brave to create a work like this. And, you know, and I think it needs to, I mean, all of this work, but this, you know, needs to be seen. So it can like sort of take people by the throat and shake them and say, oh, wake up. You know, what's going on here? This is what's happening. And this has to change. And so anyway, I thank you for, you know, your work and your courage in sharing this with us.
Thank you. Yeah, it was difficult to make it, and I couldn't imagine just even the experience that, you know, who had installed it, like even their experience, my heart went out to them. And so it's like so difficult to, you know, have to, you know that these people are going through all this pain created by just one or two individuals. You know, it's like, it's really difficult to have to see that all the time. And I know it's not just mass shootings. We have a tendency to kind of focus on those because they're more sensational and they're covered by the media. And there is all of these kinds of things that are going on in our own communities. And there's all these systemic issues that come to play about mental health, about like, you know, economic, you know, where people are living and, you know, the types of lives that they have. And so it's like the issues go far beyond what, you know, is just this one type of shooter, you know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you, Mona.
You're welcome.
And yeah, and now last but not least is Beth Costello, who this piece, it's a tiny little piece, but absolutely huge in impact. And so Beth, take it away. Really want to hear what you have to say about this. And you actually, she has a series of works that she has used, you know, imagery from Norman Rockwell and incorporated into this, into work for anti-gun violence.
Well, I'm so grateful to be here. And from what I hear from everybody, it resonates so deeply. And it's so great to see everybody else's work. But so this is part of a series that has to do with gun violence and also LGBT issues. But this first started in, well, the idea came up with Sandy Hook. And that was one of the first pieces that I did. And then this piece right here, more or less was Michael Brown inspired for Ferguson, Missouri. And I think that my work is a voice for the underdog and giving voice to people who cannot have their own voice or maybe do not have one, because that is what my art has been about for my whole entire career of being an artist, trying to find my own voice. And when I did, I could now help others find theirs. I use Norman Rockwell because I think not only is he an iconic American painter, But a lot of what he painted, I feel, were cover-ups for more issues that were not seen in that day. You know, we wanted to picture America as being perfect and having no issues except for maybe going to the fishing hole and not being able to fish, like some of his works. But these pieces, to me, present more of a look into what is there but not ever shown to the public. So in this series of work that I do, especially this one, what is and what should not be, is, you know, challenging the viewer to see what's in there, that what shouldn't be in there, which is the body line on the sidewalk that we're all too familiar with, especially with children. So I've been chasing this speak your truth throughout the country, of having people speak their truth and what they want, who are they, and what they stand for. And I realized that people are all the same and they all want the same thing. They all like want family. They all treasure family. They all treasure you know, unity and love and whatever else is out there. So I came across this thing that was from Norman Rockwell's when I was reading up on him. And I feel the same way about what can be done. And it was, if we could all just start arguing and really try to understand one another, things would be better. And I think that's a really thing that everybody should try to get to know one another or understand where they're coming from in order to rise above this violence and to really understand the situations that people are in that might cause them to have some kind of negative reaction to something, but can it be fixed? Or
Right.
to be ahead or one step ahead of, you know, what could happen, you know? So there are a lot of pieces that I use for his art because he does represent something that's so wholesome that really is not wholesome. That's just like a cover up to really what's out there.
Yeah, thank you so much and for sharing that. And it just made me think of the old Sting song, like, don't the Russians love their children too? And, you know, so when we think about it, it's like, I really have to believe as, you know, collective consciousness and humanity that we have so much more in common that should pull us together than to separate us, and to try to connect to that in order to create, you know, a better future. Because I do think that people, you know, of course, you know, we want the same thing. And yes, we do all love our children. So whether you have them or not, but you know what I'm saying. Or,
you know, after the riots in Ferguson,
yeah,
I really wanted to drive out there and set up a whole bunch of easels in some parking lot and have like this big art therapy section to really get to understand the anger behind these people and what can you do with that anger instead of, you know, putting it on others. How do you get rid of it and, you know, understand, you know, what's going on, or having your voice be heard. That's the whole thing. No, but they're not being heard. People are not being heard. And I think that is a problem.
Right. Yeah, well, thank you so much. And now I'm going to ask everyone to turn their video and mics back on, and then I'm going to hand it over to either Kim or to Rose, and to see what questions if we got any questions from the audience. And then conversely, if we don't get any questions from the audience, if the artists, if you guys have any questions for each other. But I'll give Kim a minute to pop back up.
Yeah, so we have one comment question in here now, and as any attendees would like to put a question in the Q&A box, I will read it for you, and then we can have the panelists answer it. But there is a comment from Karen Franklin King that says, was the pandemic a blessing in disguise in terms of being able to combine all of these fantastic artworks into the Deadlocked exhibition, also allowing for an encouraging collaboration between galleries like ArtRage, CFAC, and Point of Contact. This is an awesome exhibition. Thank you for your talents and for sharing. So it's maybe more of a comment than a question, but this,
yes,
I could answer it as ArtRage, I guess. Like,
yeah,
so
please do.
That we're just, you know, a year ago when we shut down, we didn't know what we'd be doing this year. So we do feel like it was an amazing opportunity to work with all of these artists from around the country, and we're so grateful that they generously like donated their work to be part of this exhibition here, and that we are able to collaborate with other visual arts organizations, because we're all in Syracuse, we're all struggling with well, I guess everyone is struggling in arts organizations right now. So it's great to see a combined effort and to bring this important work to our community. And in some ways, you know, we're incredibly sad we couldn't have an opening reception. We know it would have been like a huge event. And in some ways, it's so nice that we're able to gather this way virtually, because all these artists are from all around the country. And they probably wouldn't have been able to come to Syracuse in February, but the fact that we can all get together on Zoom is I don't know if I'd go as far as saying the pandemic is a blessing in disguise, but this was a great opportunity for us to do this.
Yeah, and I'd like to plug ArtRage as an independent nonprofit gallery is for all of the our guests and listeners to please go and make a donation to ArtRage, because so far I have put together probably at least like 40 exhibitions, around the country, and there are so few. Like ArtRage is one of the only galleries, maybe there's two others that I can think of that, that solely do artist activism, art for social justice, art for social change. And it's just so incredibly important, because it's not a gallery where, we're not going to be selling a lot of this work, if any of it, it's not the nature, but they work so hard and tirelessly. So that's my ask for people. Go to their website, make a donation of whatever you can.
Thank you.
Yeah, do we have any other questions from the chat? I know that we've gone over by like almost 20 minutes, but or if any artist comments, if anyone would like to add anything additionally.
I'd like to add can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to add the difference in the prevalence of guns today than they were in the past, because I taught for 36 years in the inner city, and as one of the artists mentioned, when there was a dispute among the students, they didn't have the access to guns. And the fact that they're so prevalent today makes everything so much, it makes it easier to resort to violence that becomes deadly. I remember one instance, I had this class mainly of boys in the art room. And one of the students told me that another student had been shot. And the hospital was not that far from the high school. So I did go up to the hospital to see him. And the first thing he said when I saw him, he was like bandaged all across the chest and the arm. And the first thing he said when he saw me was, "Miss Thomas, it wasn't my fault." And I said, "I didn't come here to, scold you. I came to see how you were doing." But that just showed that this was not common at that time. He wanted to make sure it was known that it wasn't something that he had actually precipitated. And that's so much different than it is today. And I can contrast with a comment that was made by a young student in reference to the Capitol shootings and the people having to hide under their desk. And this comment was, he didn't find it anything to feel sorry for about them because this was something that happened all the time where he lived. So it's such a change because of the availability of guns.
Yeah, thank you, Nettie.
We have a question that came in from Marianne Ellis. It says, thank you for such a powerful and moving event. My question is, was it hard to finish your art piece on such an emotional topic? I know we heard from Mona about that a little bit, but if anyone else wants to jump in on that.
I actually haven't. I had an accompanying piece to go along with that I still am reluctant to work on, because there's many different aspects about gun violence that we have to address, and so the one piece that I did do is the beginning of an entire body of work, and so yeah, extending that and trying to speak about the victims, about getting family permission also to use their images. That was something that was concerning to me. So that's a reason why I haven't pursued and gone further with it.
Yeah. And I'd like to hear more from Amy Pleasant. Amy, what was it like? I know that there was one time when you were sitting in like the coat closet or whatever with all the kids just squished in there like sardines. What was that like for you?
I was teaching art in a class and there was a robbery at the bank nearby. So the whole school went in lockdown and there were 25 kids and it was a closet that was maybe 8 by 8. And we got in there, we stuffed everybody in there and turned the light out. And the other teacher and myself, we told stories. We kind of talked very quietly, but it was like we were in there for about 45 minutes. And I think my biggest thought was how long will we be in here? And how do I keep the kids calm? And so, it's this very false world of you just trying to make things okay for the kids, but the circumstances are just bizarre and not real, or they don't seem real, but so it's an odd experience. Yeah. And I was actually in 2 different situations, and the other was again, someone involved in a robbery that came through. This was before all the classroom doors were locked. It just came down the hall and police chasing and kind of the same thing. It's like, how do I keep the kids calm?
Wow.
We had a big earthquake that year too.
Thank you for sharing that. So Kim, do we have any other questions or should we wrap up for the evening? And then again, just want to promote my 2 at 2, so 2 o'clock Eastern every day, going to be talking with as many artists as I can. And it's every day, Monday through Sunday.
There's one more question that came in from Kelly Lindsay that says, I'm new to this, so please, so forgive the obvious, but can you tell me if exhibits like this do change gun violence? So would anyone want to comment on how they feel that their art is making an impact?
I hope it is. But I think we're all important here in what we do because we are that voice for so many people, and who else would stand up for you know, these issues if the artists did not. Not that we're not the only ones, but I think we play a big role in creating something that could be positive.
Yeah, hear, hear.
I think the collaboration is so important to see all different visions of responding to gun violence, and the more voices that we are, and we're larger together. So I love that, Karen. Thank you for having us all together in this exhibit.
Thank you.
One last thing, I think I'm sorry. By creating artwork, we're also having raising awareness about these things and different viewpoints of what these issues are, and that will spread out like a ripple in a pond, you know. So I think it is valuable, and it does work.
Yeah, I agree. I think that you know, art has the ability to open up a conversation in a different way than a protest, than a newscast, than you know, a written story circulating in internet, even more powerful than memes that are circulating, you know, positive, negative, what have you. And the subtlety of it sometimes can just open up a person to understand a different perspective and say, okay, I see why, you know, this is important. And that can be the catalyst that really activates a person to take it upon themselves to be active, to be an activist, to be a politician that changes things, to be anyone that can positively affect the world and how we live and work with each other every day.
Yeah, I so agree. And I think, you know, of course, you know, with artist activism, it's like art hits you first on a visceral level that then goes from your heart to your head. And so I think, you know, then on this closing note, I just have to say how grateful I am to work with all of you and continue doing the work that you do. And yeah, and let's create a better world for all of us.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Okay, arrivederci.
Bye, everybody. It was
Bye.
nice.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Congratulations, artists.
Honored to be with you all.
Yes.
Me too.